My name is Olivia Watson, and I am 28 years old. The first thing my older sister said when I reached for the serving spoon was, "Don't fill your plate. You didn't pay for this." She said it loudly enough for every relative at my parents' party to hear. A few forks stopped in midair. My mother glanced at me, then smiled as though the insult were harmless. "Real family comes first," she said, turning back toward my sister. I had spent 3 weeks arranging that dinner, approved every menu change, and placed my own card on the reservation. Yet no one at the table knew, because I wanted the evening to feel like a gift, not a performance. My sister believed my silence made me powerless. She leaned back with the satisfied expression she always wore when she thought she had put me in my place. I looked at the untouched food on my plate, then at the people waiting to see whether I would defend myself. For years, I had explained, forgiven, and paid without asking for credit. That night, I understood that another explanation would only give them a new chance to dismiss me, so I nodded, folded my napkin, put on my red coat, and walked out. In the lobby, I asked the manager to remove my payment authorization from the final bill. I was willing to lose the deposit, but I would not finance another minute of humiliation. Moments later, he carried the folio back to the table. Through the glass doors, I watched my sister's smile disappear as he said, "The woman in the red dress canceled the reservation payment and asked me to hand this to you." Their faces drained of color, but the bill was only the beginning. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out, and what my family discovered when they opened that bill, tell me, what time is it where you are? Where are you watching from? And what is the weather like there? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. 3 weeks earlier, my mother, Joan, had called to say she wanted one simple dinner for her 60th birthday. In our family, simple never stayed simple for long. My father, Thomas, suggested the Seabrook Terrace, a private dining room inside a coastal hotel where my parents had celebrated their anniversary years ago. My older sister, Grace, immediately announced in the family group chat that she would handle the vision, then disappeared whenever the hotel asked for a deposit, menu selection, guest count, or signed agreement. I had recently received a promotion at the architecture firm where I worked, and I decided to cover the dinner as my gift to Mom. I did not tell the family the amount. I only told Grace that the reservation was secured and asked her to send me any dietary restrictions by Friday. She replied with a thumbs up, then posted, "Everything is taken care of. Mom deserves the best." Relatives thanked her. Mom sent 3 heart emojis. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, wondering why it still hurt to watch Grace receive praise for work she had not done. This was not new. When I was 16, I designed the program for our grandparents' anniversary, and Grace told everyone she had organized the event. At college graduation, she gave a toast about how she had guided me through school, although we had barely spoken that year. Whenever I corrected the record, Mom said I was being sensitive. Whenever I stayed quiet, Grace treated my silence as permission. Why did I keep hoping generosity would make people fair? I wish I could say I had a noble answer. The truth was uglier. I still wanted my mother to look at me with the uncomplicated pride she gave Grace. I wanted one family evening where no one compared us, corrected me, or turned my effort into evidence that I was trying too hard. So I signed the contract, paid a $2,000 non-refundable room deposit, and authorized my card for the estimated balance after service. The original dinner package was just under $8,000. Then Grace began making changes. She added a premium wine pairing, a seafood tower, custom floral arrangements, and 6 guests I had never met. Each time the event coordinator copied me on an email, Grace wrote back first, "Approved. Olivia knows." I called the coordinator, a calm man named Daniel, and made it clear that no additional charge could be finalized without my written consent. He apologized and marked the file. I approved the flowers for Mom and rejected the rest. 2 days later, Grace called me. "Why are you making this difficult?" she asked. "Mom only turned 60 once." I reminded her that she was welcome to pay for upgrades herself. She laughed. "You always make money so awkward." That sentence told me everything. Grace wanted the authority of a host without the cost of being one. Still, I kept the reservation. I chose a blue and silver cake because those were Mom's favorite colors, prepared a short slideshow of family photos, and arranged transportation for our grandparents. I even asked Daniel not to announce who had paid. "I don't want a speech about me," I told him. "This is for my mother." The night of the party, I arrived early wearing a red dress and matching coat. Daniel reviewed the final estimate with me, $9,400, including service, tax, and the flowers I had approved. My card would be charged after dessert. I signed the updated authorization and slipped the copy into my purse. Grace arrived 20 minutes later in white, kissed Mom on both cheeks, and began directing the photographer as if she owned the room. She moved place cards, complained that the centerpieces were too low, and told two relatives that she had worked tirelessly to create the evening. I heard her, but I said nothing. Part of me was saving the truth for later. Another part was still trying to protect Mom's birthday from becoming another battlefield. At dinner, Grace took the seat beside Mom and placed me near the end of the table. When I quietly moved my place card back to the host's seat Daniel had assigned me, Grace raised one eyebrow. "That's for whoever organized this," she said. I met her gaze and asked, "Are you sure you want to make that the rule?" She smiled because she thought I was bluffing. I sat down anyway. For the first course, she talked over me. During the second, she accepted compliments about the venue. By the time the main dish arrived, she had rewritten the entire evening with herself at the center, and Mom was helping her do it. Then I reached for the serving spoon, and Grace decided that taking credit was not enough. She needed to humiliate me too. "Don't fill your plate," Grace said, tapping the serving spoon with one manicured finger. "You didn't contribute a penny to this dinner." She did not whisper. She wanted an audience. The conversation around us collapsed into silence, and I felt the old family reflex take over. Everyone looked at me to see how gracefully I would absorb the insult. Mom smiled into her wineglass. "Grace is only teasing," she said, then added, "Real family comes first. We should be grateful to the people who actually showed up for me." I had arrived before everyone. I had signed every document. I was sitting 2 seats away because Grace had moved my place card. Yet Mom's words made me feel like an uninvited guest. I asked her calmly, "Who do you believe paid for tonight?" She looked surprised that I had answered at all. Grace laughed before Mom could respond. "Please, you probably booked the room with Dad's hotel points and expect a parade." A cousin lowered his eyes. My aunt pretended to adjust her napkin. Dad studied the label on the wine bottle as though it contained instructions for escaping the table. I could have opened my purse and placed the contract beside Grace's plate. I could have listed every call, every payment, every detail she had claimed as her own. But a question stopped me. If proof was the only language they respected, why was I still volunteering to pay for people who had already decided I was worthless? I set down the serving spoon. "You're right," I said. Grace blinked. She had expected an argument. I shouldn't eat food I didn't contribute to. Mom gave a relieved little laugh, believing I had surrendered. I folded my napkin carefully, placed it beside my empty plate, and stood. Grace's smile widened. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "I'm correcting the arrangement." I put on my red coat and walked toward the lobby. No one followed me. That hurt more than Grace's insult, but it also made the next decision easier. Daniel was at the reception desk reviewing service notes. I asked whether the final charge had been processed. He said no, the authorization would convert after dessert. I told him to remove my card from the folio. He reminded me that the room deposit was non-refundable and that the remaining balance would become due immediately from the party. "I understand," I said. "Please keep the deposit. Consider it the price of learning." He hesitated. "Would you like me to tell them there has been a payment issue?" "Tell them the truth," I replied. "The woman in red canceled the reservation payment and asked you to deliver the bill." Daniel studied my face, then nodded. I walked toward the valet desk, but before I reached the outer doors, I heard my father call my name from the dining room. I turned. Through the glass partition, I saw Daniel place a black leather folio beside Grace's plate. Her smile vanished. Mom leaned toward him, confused. Daniel repeated the sentence exactly as I had requested. Even from the lobby, I could see the color leave their faces. Grace opened the folio, scanned the total, and snapped it shut. Dad pushed his chair back and came toward me. Olivia, what did you do? He asked. Not what did they say to you. Not why did you leave. What did you do? I looked past him at the table. I stopped paying for a dinner I was told I had not contributed to. He lowered his voice. This is your mother's birthday. It was also my gift, I said. Grace rejected the gift in front of everyone. I'm respecting her decision. Behind him, Grace stood and waved the bill. This is insane. She can't abandon us with this. Daniel remained composed. The host removed her payment method before settlement. The outstanding balance is $9,486. Grace stared at him. I'm the host. Daniel opened his tablet. The contract, deposit receipt, menu approvals, and card authorization are all in Olivia Watson's name. A murmur moved around the table. One relative whispered, I thought Grace paid. Another said, that's what she told us. Grace's head snapped toward them. I coordinated everything. Daniel scrolled once. The event file shows that Ms. Watson coordinated the reservation. It also shows several upgrade requests from your email that were denied because you were not financially authorized. Grace's face turned red. Mom looked from Daniel to me as if the room had shifted under her feet. Olivia, come back inside, she said. We can discuss this privately. You were comfortable humiliating me publicly? I replied. Why should the truth require privacy? That was when my grandfather, George, slowly removed his glasses and set them on the table. He had been quiet all evening, but his silence was nothing like Dad's. He was watching, measuring, remembering. Before anyone asks Olivia for another thing, he said, Grace should explain why she collected money from several of us for a dinner Olivia already paid for. Grace froze. I did too. I had known she was taking credit. I had not known she had taken contributions. George reached into his jacket and placed his phone beside the bill. On the screen was a message from Grace. Send me your share by Friday. I'm covering the party, but every little bit helps. Below it was a transfer receipt for $500. My aunt checked her own phone. Then my cousin did the same. Within seconds, 4 relatives had found payments totaling more than $2,000. The room was no longer looking at me. Every eye had turned toward Grace. Grace looked at the transfer receipts as if they had appeared by magic. That money was for extras, she said. Flowers, transportation, tips. Things Olivia probably forgot. Daniel turned his tablet so the nearest relatives could see the itemized contract. Transportation was paid directly by Ms. Watson. The floral invoice is included in the venue total. Gratuity is also included. My aunt asked Grace where her $300 had gone. My cousin asked the same about his $200. Grace's answers collided with each other. First she said the money was still in her account. Then she said she had spent it on a surprise. Then she insisted everyone had misunderstood her message. George lifted one hand and the question stopped. There is nothing unclear about send me your share, he said. You allowed this family to believe you financed the evening. You insulted the person who actually did, and you collected money on top of it. Grace turned toward me with panic replacing arrogance. Olivia set this up. She knew exactly how this would look. I almost admired the speed with which she tried to make my boundary into her conspiracy. I didn't know about the transfers, I said, but I do know you told the hotel you were authorized to add charges. Daniel nodded. There is one more matter. He opened an email chain and read the subject line, Birthday Presentation Revision. Grace had contacted the venue that afternoon and requested a new cake plaque reading, with love from Grace and the family. She had also asked the photographer to place her beside Mom for every formal picture and instructed the staff not to mention my name during the toast. The final line of her email said, Olivia prefers to stay out of the spotlight. I felt something inside me go still. Grace had not simply accepted mistaken praise. She had designed my disappearance. Mom read the email twice. You told me Olivia didn't want to be involved, she said. Grace's mouth opened, but no answer came. Mom looked at me. Is that why you didn't give the birthday speech? Grace told me you wanted her to do it, I said. She told me you thought I made events too much about myself. Mom's face tightened. Dad finally returned to the table, no longer able to hide behind a bottle label. "Grace, pay the bill," he said. The directness of his voice surprised everyone. Grace laughed once, a brittle sound. "With what? I didn't agree to $9,000. "Neither did the relatives who sent you money under false pretenses," George replied, "yet you accepted theirs." Grace pulled a credit card from her purse and handed it to Daniel with a flourish meant to restore control. "Fine. Charge it. Then everyone can stop acting like I committed some unforgivable crime." Daniel took the card to the terminal. We waited. The machine beeped. He tried again, then returned and quietly said the transaction had been declined. Grace's face went from red to gray. She offered a second card. That one was declined too. No one laughed. Their silence was worse. It stripped away the image Grace had spent years polishing, the successful daughter, the generous organizer, the person who always knew better. Mom looked devastated, but for once she did not rush to protect her. "You told me you had paid for the venue," she said. "You let me thank you in front of everyone." Grace's eyes filled, but her voice remained sharp. "I was going to make it work. Olivia always has money. She enjoys rescuing everyone." That sentence ended whatever sympathy remained in the room. I stepped back through the glass doors and returned to the edge of the table, not to rescue them, but because I wanted Grace to hear me clearly. "I did enjoy helping," I said. "What I did not enjoy was being erased while you spent my money as evidence of your generosity." Grace whispered, "You're really going to leave Mom with this bill?" I looked at Mom. "No. Grace is." She claimed the dinner, accepted the credit, collected the contributions, and told me not to eat. Ownership comes with a price. George asked Daniel to separate the charges Grace had requested from the original package. Daniel explained that the party could settle the bill using multiple cards. Dad paid a portion. Mom used money from a savings account. Several relatives applied their earlier contributions only after Grace transferred them back. Grace stood at the table making repayment after repayment, while everyone watched the balance in her account fall. She had to borrow the final amount from Dad, who told her it would be documented and repaid monthly. The dinner continued only because the venue had already served most of the food, but the celebration was over. No one asked Grace to make the toast. The photographer removed her requested shot list. The cake plaque was replaced with the original message I had approved. "Happy 60th, Mom." When Daniel offered me a slice, I declined. I had lost $2,000, but I had gained something I had never been able to buy: a clean answer. They had not failed to recognize my effort because I had explained it poorly. They had failed because my silence was convenient for them. As I left for the second time, Mom followed me into the lobby. "Please don't let this destroy the family," she said. I turned to her and asked the question I had avoided my entire life. "Why is the family only considered destroyed when I stop accepting the damage?" She had no answer. I went home alone, but for the first time, I did not feel abandoned. I felt finished. The messages began before I reached my apartment. Dad wrote, "Your mother is crying." Grace wrote, "You humiliated me on purpose." Mom called 6 times, then sent a voice message asking me to come back and end the night with Grace. The wording would have been funny if I had not heard the accusation beneath it. They still believed peace was something I produced by swallowing the truth. I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I found 37 messages in the family group chat. Grace had posted a long explanation claiming she had collected contributions because she intended to reimburse me later. George replied with one sentence, "Then show the transfer you plan to make." She did not answer. My aunt asked why Grace had changed the cake plaque. My cousin shared a screenshot of Grace telling him Olivia barely helped, so I'm covering almost everything. Mom asked everyone to stop discussing private matters in the group. George wrote, "The deception happened in this group. The correction belongs here too." I did not add anything. For once, the facts were working without my labor. On Monday, Grace came to my office lobby without an appointment. She wore sunglasses and held an envelope. I met her downstairs because I did not want her near my colleagues. She pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a check for $2,000, the amount of my lost deposit. "There," she said. Now we're even. I handed it back. We're not even. Money is the easiest part. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were tired, but her anger was intact. What else do you want? An audience? A public execution? I want a public correction, I said. Tell the family I planned and funded the dinner. Tell them you collected money while claiming you were paying. Return every contribution. Reimburse Dad for the amount he covered. And stop speaking for me. She stared at me as though I had asked for something cruel. You want me to destroy my reputation? No. I want you to stop using mine to protect yours. Grace lowered her voice. Mom will never forgive you for this. That was the moment I understood she had not come to apologize. She had come to restore the old arrangement. She would offer a token, I would accept blame for the conflict, and everyone would move on without changing. I slipped the check back into the envelope and placed it in her hand. Then Mom can make her own choice. Grace left without another word. 2 days later, Mom asked me to attend a family meeting at my parents' house. I agreed under one condition. Nobody would ask me to apologize for leaving the dinner. When I arrived, George was already there with a folder. Dad sat beside Mom, looking 10 years older. Grace took the chair across from me. Mom began with the usual speech about sisters, misunderstandings, and how one painful night should not erase a lifetime of love. I listened until she said, Olivia, you could have handled it privately. I tried private for years, I replied. Every time Grace took credit, insulted me, or changed the story, you told me to let it go. Privacy did not solve the problem. It protected it. Dad looked at the floor. Mom started to defend herself, but George opened his folder. Inside were printed copies of the venue emails, the transfer messages, and several older group chats. One was from my graduation, when Grace had told relatives she paid for my celebration. I had paid for it myself. Another was from a holiday trip, when she had claimed I canceled at the last minute. In reality, Grace had given me the wrong departure date, then used my absence to call me unreliable. George had asked family members to send him examples, and the pattern filled 23 pages. Grace's face changed as each page turned. This was no longer one dinner she could dismiss as confusion. It was a history. Dad finally spoke. I knew some of this, he admitted. Not the money, but the way you two were treated differently. I stayed quiet because every confrontation became exhausting. I looked at him. Your silence was a decision. It just made Grace's life easier and mine harder. He nodded slowly. Mom began to cry, but I did not move to comfort her. That was another role I had performed automatically. Grace asked, So, what happens now? George answered before I could. You repay what you owe, you correct the lies, and until trust is rebuilt, you will not manage family money, reservations, group gifts, or events. Mom looked startled. Grace looked furious. For years, organizing family occasions had been her throne. Losing that role hurt more than the declined cards. Dad agreed. Then Mom, after a long silence, agreed too. Grace looked at me, waiting for me to soften the consequence. I did not. Revenge, I realized, was not the moment her card failed. It was the moment the family stopped asking me to protect her from the truth. Grace waited 4 days before posting the correction. It was not graceful. She wrote that emotions had been high, communication had failed, and certain assumptions had been made about the party. George replied privately to her, then she deleted the post and tried again. The second version was shorter and honest. Olivia planned the dinner, paid the deposit, authorized the reservation, selected the menu, arranged transportation, and approved the decorations. I falsely allowed everyone to believe I was the host. I also collected contributions without telling her, and used her silence to make myself look generous. What I said at the table was cruel and untrue. I am returning the money and repaying what others covered. I read it twice, waiting for the familiar urge to reassure her. It never came. Relatives responded with restrained messages. Nobody attacked her, but nobody rushed to erase the consequences either. My aunt asked for repayment by Friday. My cousin said he needed space. Dad created a written schedule for the money Grace owed him. Mom removed Grace from the family event account and gave the records to an outside bookkeeper, something she should have done years earlier. The punishment was not dramatic, but it was complete. Grace lost control of the story, the money, and the role that had made her feel untouchable. A week later, Mom came to my apartment alone. She carried the blue and silver birthday cake topper Daniel had saved after the dinner. She set it on my kitchen counter and said, "I owe you an apology without asking you to make me feel better." That was the first promising sentence she had spoken. She admitted that she had favored Grace because Grace demanded attention, while I seemed capable of taking care of myself. "You made competence look easy," she said. "I treated that as permission to give you less." I told her competence was not the absence of need. I had needed her to defend me. I had needed her to ask one question before believing Grace. I had needed her not to smile when I was humiliated. Mom cried quietly. This time, I handed her a tissue, but I did not tell her everything was fine. "I love you," I said. "That does not mean we return to normal. Normal is what hurt me." We agreed to meet once a week for coffee and to stop using family gatherings as a shortcut for real repair. Dad called separately and apologized for treating avoidance as neutrality. I told him the same thing I had told him at the hotel. Silence chooses a side when only one person benefits from it. He began attending counseling with Mom, which mattered more to me than any speech. Grace did not contact me for nearly a month. During that silence, I received an email from Daniel at the hotel. He attached a final document I had never seen, a proposed toast Grace had sent to the event staff. In it, she planned to thank Mom for teaching her that the people who truly contribute never need recognition, then announced that she had personally saved the party after I became too busy with work. The cruelty was deliberate, polished, and scheduled between the main course and cake. I forwarded the document to George, Mom, and Dad with no commentary. Mom called Grace immediately. I did not hear the conversation, but I learned later that Mom canceled a planned weekend trip with her and told her they would not resume their usual closeness until Grace addressed the pattern honestly. That was the loss Grace had feared most. She was no longer the protected daughter whose motives were automatically trusted. When Grace finally asked to meet, we chose a public cafe. She arrived without an envelope, an excuse, or sunglasses. "I read the toast again," she said. "I don't recognize the person who wrote it." "I do," I replied. "I have known her for years." She winced, but she did not argue. She admitted that my promotion had triggered something in her. She had been struggling financially and had built her identity around being the impressive one. Instead of admitting fear, she tried to reduce me. "I thought if everyone saw you as selfish, I would still look valuable," she said. I asked whether she was sorry for hurting me or sorry the plan failed. She took a long time to answer. "Both," she said finally. It was not the perfect answer, but it was honest. I told her I was not ready to forgive her and might never trust her with money or my reputation again. She nodded. "What can I do?" "Change when nobody is watching," I said. "And stop expecting access to me as proof that you changed." We left separately. There was no hug, no music, and no instant healing. That made the moment more real than every family promise we had made before. 6 months later, Mom invited me to a small family dinner at the same hotel. My first instinct was to refuse. Then she sent the reservation confirmation, the paid receipt, and a guest list with no surprises. "You do not need to organize anything," her message said. "You only need to decide whether you want to come." That distinction mattered. I accepted. When I arrived, Grace was already seated, but she had not touched the place cards, the menu, or the photographer's schedule because there was no photographer. The dinner was simple, fully paid, and intentionally ordinary. Mom had arranged it herself with Dad. George sat at the head of the table, watching everyone with the faint smile of a man who knew progress was less impressive than performance, but far more valuable. Grace greeted me politely. She did not attempt a dramatic apology. Over the previous months, she had repaid every relative and completed 3 payments to Dad. She had also stopped managing family events and begun meeting with a therapist. I knew these things because Mom occasionally mentioned them, Not because Grace used them to bargain for forgiveness. That difference mattered too. During the main course, a serving dish was placed between Grace and me. For one suspended second, I remembered her finger tapping the spoon and her voice telling me not to fill my plate. Grace remembered as well. She moved the dish toward me and said, "You first." It was a small gesture. I did not mistake it for transformation, but I accepted it. I filled my plate without apology. Later, Mom stood to make a toast. She thanked Dad for helping with the dinner, George for insisting on honesty, and Grace for taking responsibility. Then she looked at me. I used to praise Olivia for being strong when what I really meant was that I expected her to survive without support, she said. I was wrong. Her generosity was never an obligation, and her boundaries are not a punishment. The room remained quiet, but this silence did not erase me. It made space for the truth. Mom did not ask me to respond. She simply raised her glass. That restraint was part of her apology. After dinner, Grace found me near the lobby windows. I know we're not fixed, she said. I also know I spent years making you smaller because I was afraid of feeling small. I told her that understanding the reason did not remove the damage. I know, she said. I'm going to keep doing the work anyway. I believed she meant it in that moment. I also knew belief did not require immediate trust. We walked back to the table separately. The family never returned to the old version of normal. Grace was no longer treated as the automatic leader. Dad no longer disappeared when conversations became uncomfortable. Mom checked facts before defending anyone. I stopped funding celebrations to earn affection, stopped accepting jokes that were really insults, and stopped explaining boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. Some relatives called me colder. George called me clearer. He was right. Clarity did not make me cruel. It ended the tradition of treating my pain as the price of everyone else's comfort. The night Grace told me not to eat because I had not contributed a penny, she expected me to defend the cost of my plate. Instead, I stopped paying for the entire illusion. The bill exposed her lies, but the real consequence was larger. She lost the protection that had allowed those lies to thrive. I did not get revenge by ruining her life. I got it by refusing to let her build her life on my silence. Forgiveness, if it came, would be earned slowly and privately. Respect came first. And every time I remember walking out in that red coat, I no longer think about the money I lost. I think about the part of myself I finally stopped giving away. So tell me honestly, if someone in your own family took credit for your sacrifices, humiliated you in public, and expected you to keep paying for the privilege, would you forgive them once they apologized? Or would you make them prove they had changed before letting them back into your life?